At the edge of a quiet village, just as the first pale light of dawn touched the dust, people noticed a shape crawling toward the gates, slow, heavy, and struggling with every breath. It wasn't a stray animal or a confused cow. It was a fully grown male lion, his golden mane darkened with dried blood, his legs trembling as he dragged himself forward inch by inch. Children froze where they stood, elders shouted warnings, and doors slammed shut in fear. Lions never come this close to humans unless something is desperately wrong, and the sight of a wounded predator approaching the village felt like a living nightmare. Yet, instead of baring his teeth or roaring, the lion lifted his head weakly, his eyes dull but filled with something no one expected, pleading, almost human-like desperation. The air was thick with confusion. Was he seeking shelter? Was he dying? Or was there something even more alarming behind him? When he collapsed at the gates with a low, broken exhale, the villagers realized they weren't witnessing a threat. They were witnessing a cry for help. Word spread quickly, and soon a crowd formed, watching the lion from a safe distance. Fear mixed with curiosity as everyone tried to understand why he had chosen their village of all places. A local wildlife officer arrived, moving slowly, scanning the lion's body with trained eyes. Up close, the injuries looked far worse: deep gashes, claw marks, and punctures that hinted at a violent struggle hours earlier. But there was something else, something strange about the direction he had come from. The lion kept glancing back along the trail, as if trying to communicate, as if urging someone to look. The wildlife officer knelt, realizing this wasn't a random wandering or an accident. The lion hadn't come here to attack or to hide. He had come with a purpose, a message carved into every wound and every shallow breath. And whatever that message was, it was about to shock everyone in the village. The village fell into an uneasy silence as the wounded lion lay at the gate, his breath slow and uneven, his once mighty body trembling beneath the weight of pain. People stood behind walls, clutching their children, whispering fears of what might happen if he gathered even a little strength. The wildlife officer stepped forward carefully, his boots crunching in the dust, every movement watched by dozens of anxious eyes. The lion's ear twitched at the sound, but he didn't move. His paw shifted only slightly, stretching forward as though he wanted to close the distance but didn't have the strength left to try.
The officer paused, sensing that what he was witnessing was not aggression, but exhaustion mixed with something deeper: desperation.
He noticed how the lion's gaze kept locking onto him, steady and unblinking, not with challenge but with a pleading heaviness. A few villagers urged him to drive the animal away before it attacked, but even their voices carried uncertainty. Nothing about this scene felt like the encounters they feared. The officer knelt slowly, keeping his hands low, studying the lion's wounds. The closer he looked, the more he realized this creature hadn't come here to strike fear. He had come seeking help. As the officer examined the lion more closely, he realized the wounds weren't fresh. They were torn, ragged, and layered, signs of multiple struggles. Something had chased this animal far from the safety of his territory. The lion lifted his head again, but instead of focusing on the officer, he looked past him, back toward the open plains he had crawled from. The officer followed that gaze, scanning the dusty trail, until he saw faint marks in the sand, tiny paw prints, lighter and smaller than the lion's own. His heart tightened. These weren't just the tracks of a wounded father. They were the prints of cubs, 2 of them, trailing behind until their small strength gave out. The realization swept through the crowd as the officer pointed to the prints, explaining what he saw. Fear slowly melted into a heavy, shared concern. The villagers had expected a predator approaching their homes, but instead found a parent fighting to keep his family alive. The lion, as if understanding their shift in emotion, attempted to rise again, forcing his body up for a moment before collapsing. That final effort made everything clear. He wasn't begging for mercy, he was begging for someone to follow the trail he could no longer lead. With the truth revealed, the rescue team acted quickly. Leaving a few villagers to watch over the exhausted lion, the officer and several volunteers followed the fading tracks into the wilderness. The prints grew frantic, circling around a dried ravine, and then they found them 2 small cubs huddled together beneath a fallen branch, crying softly, their bodies weak with hunger and fear. The rescuers moved slowly, speaking in calm tones, lifting the cubs gently as they whimpered in confusion. When they returned to the village, the lion sensed them before he even saw them. His head lifted, his eyes widening with a faint, fading spark. The cubs were placed beside him, and in that fragile moment, the mighty lion became nothing more than a father, nudging his cubs with trembling breaths. The villagers stood in silence, witnessing a bond they had never expected to see so close to their homes. The rescue vehicle arrived, and the lion was carefully loaded alongside his cubs. He didn't fight. He simply closed his eyes, trusting the humans who had chosen compassion over fear. And in that moment, everyone understood that this lion had not crawled to their gates to survive, he had crawled there so his family could. Weeks passed, and the village that had once watched in fear now watched in awe. The lion, once a proud and wounded king of the wild, had recovered under careful care. His wounds healed, but his spirit forever changed by the kindness of humans. Beside him, the cubs grew strong, playful, and curious, always under the watchful gaze of their father. The story of their rescue spread beyond the village, touching hearts across the region, reminding people that even the fiercest creatures can show vulnerability and trust. Villagers who had once barricaded their doors now brought food to the sanctuary, leaving it near the fence for the family they had helped save. Children laughed as they watched the cubs tumble in the grass. An elder spoke quietly of the courage it took to face fear with compassion. And though the lion would eventually return to the wild, the bond he formed with the humans at the gates would remain a symbol of hope, trust, and the quiet miracles that happen when fear is replaced by empathy. What began as a terrifying encounter ended as a story of life, resilience, and the extraordinary power of understanding. The wounded lion had crawled to them for help, and in doing so, he changed an entire village forever.